tackle this question of harmonization and the fact that there are efforts taking place in Europe, which are getting very much more complicated now with SEPA and the PSD, for example, and the preliminary trends in Asia in terms of creating harmonization on a bilateral basis, particularly between China UnionPay and individual countries that it does business with, and also the initiative in the ASEAN realm, and how that's turning out, and what banks are thinking about as a result of needing to think about cross-border harmonization.
I think China UnionPay is a really interesting example that we're watching at the moment, and what the People's Bank of China have done very well is they've put in place some very good regulation within the Chinese national market that all the banks have to work from a China UnionPay compliant perspective. And because of the number of affluent Chinese who are now traveling the world, all the banks around the world are having to accept these China UnionPay cards. So they're very rapidly getting to a payment scheme that can be used that is China only and doesn't have to rely on the international networks such as Visa and MasterCard today. So it's very interesting watching that happen, and the Indian Reserve Bank is now just launched the National Payments Company, and the National Payments Company, although their charter hasn't been fully defined yet, it is moving towards looking at that same model, because you've got 2.5 billion people between these two countries, and you have to have a payment scheme that is going to work.
So what you're saying is that there is this desire for greater harmonization, cross-border harmonization, and yet at the same time there is this temptation to create nationally unique payment infrastructure. Would you say that
you're never going to get away from national unique payment structure? I mean, and you look at the euro and you look at SEPA, you're still going to have the French banks operating there and the German banks operating there. I mean, you're never going to have complete standardization.
So if I was a typical commercial bank, how should I think about that? And how do I plug in my own plans against opportunities in terms of making money from cross-border transactions? Do I just surrender to a China UnionPay, or do I just surrender to a Visa or a MasterCard?
Well, no, surrender is not your option if you're providing payment services. And going back to something you said earlier, SEPA was complicated. It was supposed to simplify things. And the idea was that there was all these different types of payment formats, and now we're kind of consolidating to one or two. So I think you're going to see a lot more of these innovative payment types come up. As Jeremy just gave the example in China, there's examples in the United States of things like PayPal. There's examples coming up now where you can actually transfer money to your phone, and you can use your phone as a card when you're passing through a store to buy something. Yeah. And these are all going to be challenges into the banks where our payment providers, because what's happening is there's a traditional method and there's a new method. And some of these people don't have bank accounts. Matter of fact, I think most of the people in the world don't have a bank account that do have a bank account. So it's going to strain all kinds of the different payment infrastructures that we have today in the way we know it.
Are you then suggesting that we're moving towards anytime, anywhere payment infrastructure? Is that a holy grail that we need to be working towards?
I think it's a holy grail, and I think Jeremy was on it earlier about the time frame where it's a payment can be a payment, it can be anywhere and any time. But I think there's so much work that's to happen to consolidate the silos today between countries and between different payment types that it's going to be some time to get there, which is going to allow some of these niche providers to start coming in and making their own payment networks available to banks. It's going to be quite interesting.
Given the fact that there are so many vendors today trying to sell into all of these opportunities, is there a discipline within ACI in trying to contribute to the harmonization agenda in the way that in which you develop your applications at ACI and how that works out?
Sure. Well, ACI has been around now for over 30 years. And Jeremy and I were speaking about this earlier today, and he made a great point, which I'd like him to expand upon, is we really were around when the United States started from a very state-owned banking system to a national bank system, which may have started a trend globally to a global banking system. And so we were kind of the infrastructure and the process behind all of that, which has enabled us to spread into 90 countries with over 700 customers. And the needs of all those customers are very similar when you look at what matching that against the different trends in the marketplace. And I can't see it being any different here in Asia.
No, it's not. And you know, when I was working in Europe, I often talked about in the late 80s and early 90s when the US was going through this consolidation process. It was really a very relevant example and experience for Europe today and the Eurozone today. Now, the Asian markets are not as advanced in terms of moving towards a SEPA or a national banking, a non-state banking. Having said that, if you look at the ASEAN market as one market, 10 countries, 600 million people, and the opportunity to have a common payment scheme is recognized by government, by banks. Now, it took SEPA 50 years to actually get from first time they talked about it to actually getting the PSD agreed.
Okay.
I don't see any reason why it's going to take any less. Hopefully it'll be a little bit faster in ASEAN, but it's a really hard thing to bring different cultures, different languages, different beliefs, different religions, bring them all into one payment scheme.
Right. It's interesting that ACI has this concept of agility in terms of trying to consolidate its product proposition. Is that driven by what the client wants, or is that driven by the fact that you are a established company with all of these different products and you need to make sense of that today?
No, it's driven by what the customer wants. And what the benefits, if you have a fully responsive and agile system, you will have simplified processes, lower IT infrastructure costs, greater data availability, more real-time systems, which will result in the ability to bring products to market much faster and at a lower cost per transaction than your competitors. So you will win market.
All that is fine. Does that also mean that the way in which you interact with clients has to change? Because from what you're telling me, your salespeople, for example, will probably have to talk to clients at different levels in order to sort of help them bring that together. In other words, you sell several times in the same institutions that you go to.
I mean, we started the business in 1975. Today we have a core of about 600 or 700 customers, I would say. And that's not a lot of customers for a company that's been in the business for 35 years and is established in the payments business. And that's because we have a very deep relationship with each of those customers. Now, that's been more challenging for us in Asia as we've worked through partners and through distributors. But we're moving towards a much more consultative relationship with customers and advising them on how they could actually use our intellectual property in order to further that business.
Pick up on the agile theme for just a second. I would say that Jeremy's right, it's driven by the customers, but we also are providing an extremely unique perspective, which a lot of the executives like to hear from us on. We're really one of the only payment companies that can look at how payments get initiated at the corporate level, how payments get managed and routed, and how risk management gets assessed to those. And when you look at that, that's the workflow of a payment. And what the customers are saying is we want to be more agile in how we make adjustments to that. And that kind of gives us a perspective that I think others just really don't have, because they're dealing with one piece of that problem. They're not dealing with all three of those.
I've been talking with Ralph Dangelmaier and Jeremy Wilmot of ACI. The demand in terms of the transformation taking place in payments today comes a lot from risk, fraud management, as well as integrating the back end and trying to make sense of the revenue proposition going forward. I'd like to thank both of you for having joined me in this conversation.
Thank you.